I appreciate everything you've done for me. Pam, you've taken really good care of me your entire life. Those were the last words I would hear from my 93-year-old grandmother, my mama, say to me as I was lotioning her down after I gave her a sponge bath that morning. A few hours later that day, she slipped into a coma. That was August 19th, 2011. She passed away September 1st, 2011. My story of bereavement and grief is my story, but the loss of a loved one is everyone's story. The loss of a marriage, the ending of a marriage, the death of your animal, your pet, or losing a job. Everyone will progress through the stages of grief in no particular order, and you may not experience every stage of grief. Estimates on how long the grief process should take are personal. One person may say it takes a few weeks, while others might say anywhere from a few months to a number of years. You're all entitled to your own schedule. My grandmother's 7 children are older than me, but I was the quasi-family lead, and she only trusted me to handle her affairs. So I went about the next few days planning her funeral and settling her estate. Her funeral was held on September 6, 2011, and then September 21st happened. I'm home, and I hear this unimaginable scream from my daughter's room. When I open the door, she's standing in the middle of the floor, screaming, jumping up and down, hysterical. You see, she was in the midst of grieving her great-grandmother, but she was also grieving her dad. So let me rewind. March 2011, 5 months previous, my daughter's father suddenly died of an illness. And I had to look into her 10-year-old eyes and break the news he was gone. The main thing, this man had loved and protected her for 10 short years. He was gone. To witness her stage of denial, her reaction, her anger, anguish, her pain, it was unbearable as a mom to see and to deal with. At times it appears that she was both dealing with the stages of denial and anger. If you have ever been around a young child when they lose a parent, the grief is immensely intense. When their grief is triggered, it's like they're hearing about the death for the very first time, each and every time there's a trigger. And this can go on for years. In fact, it went on for years, and it's still going on with her. In the span of 6 months, 2 sudden and unexpected deaths hurled me into a tailspin of complicated bereavement and grief that would last for almost 3 years. Because I was in my own sadness stage on September 21st, I didn't pay attention to my daughter's bereavement because I was in my own sadness. You see, that was the first birthday without her dad. A trigger. Oh my goodness, I thought, I'm a horrible mom, I'm not paying attention. But that wasn't it. I was in my own distress as well. Before my mom got sick, I was actually beginning to read her distress signals. So I was doing pretty good about that. But by September, I couldn't remember what day of the week it was, much less paying attention to her grief or my own. My daughter was regularly seeing a grief counselor immediately following her dad's death. But by September, I realized I needed help too. I had stopped returning phone calls. I didn't feel like leaving the house. I was only doing what was absolutely necessary, and that was to care for my child. That's all that mattered to me. Nothing and no one else mattered. Eventually, I found the right counselor for myself. And when she heard my whole complicated bereavement story, the most important and liberating thing she said to me was, "Pam, it's okay to grieve. Give yourself permission. Permission is granted.
Amen.
Now grieve."
Yes.
And it was like, I felt like a feather, just light as a feather at that moment. I felt no longer stuck in the moment. I had been feeling guilty. Yeah, feeling guilty. Guilty for not being there for my family, my friends, for not being the Pam that they were accustomed to.
Wow.
I would put this veil on before I left home. You all can relate to that, I'm sure. Some of you can, maybe it's just me.
No.
And when asked, I would say, "I'm all right," with the veil, right? Even through the stages of shock and disbelief, back in March with my baby girl's loss, I would don the veil, thinking that would help her get through the day. Let me tell you, it's okay to put the veil on. You may need it to get through the day, the hour, even minutes. No one can dictate your grieving. No one. It's yours. However, there is grief work that you must go through to arrive at the stage of acceptance. I learned you can't go through grief. You can't go around grief. You have to go through it. Remind yourself that any confusion you're feeling is normal for your situation. Lower your expectations of what you can accomplish each day. Don't make major decisions like buying a house in the midst of grief. Divide tasks into smaller increments and adjust your goals. Give yourself extra time for getting ready for events. Start slowly to build a daily routine that will give you new habits. Eat healthy meals, exercise, get plenty of rest. Buy a special notebook for your list. It's harder to use a notebook because it's harder to lose a piece of paper than lose your notebook. Review your list at the beginning of every day and as often as needed. But most importantly, be patient with yourself. After all, I had permission. You have permission too. My daughter and I were fortunate to do grief work together. I'm thankful for it because had I continued to wear that veil, I would have done more harm to her than good. I was more prepared to answer any questions she asked, even the hard ones. I provided a space for open and honest dialogue. I expressed my feelings, which encouraged her to do the same. I think the hardest emotion I had to overcome prior to the stage of acceptance was fear. I was afraid to leave her. I kept thinking, what if something happens to me? I would pray, "Oh God, please don't take me." Every day, I was frozen. I didn't want to leave home because I didn't want to leave her. Everyone knows my passport stays on already, and I like to travel. But for 2 years, I did not. I couldn't bear getting on a plane. I was afraid something would happen to the plane. So let's fast forward to January 2013. I can vividly remember looking into the mirror one day, and I finally recognized the young lady Mama raised, me.
That's right.
2 years I looked in the mirror and I had no idea who she was. I didn't even care sometimes. I felt a range of emotions. I was excited, I was happy, but I also felt a little guilty. But because I had done the grief work, I recognized feeling guilty was part of the process. Because I'm feeling good about myself, and I shouldn't be guilty about being in a good place. I quickly accepted that it was normal. I found comfort in routine, getting back to activities that brought me joy, to the connections that drew me closer to others that helped me come to terms with my loss and aided in my grieving. I believe the greatest way to honor my mama was to continue to live my life.
Amen.
Her lifelong service was in service of God, her family, and addressing the needs of others. I decided to live my life fully, to be compassionate, empathetic of others. I decided to be a better listener, to make new friends and to treasure old friends. I decided to spend quality time with my family. I was ready for it. I had done the work. We all get to decide how we live our life. We get to decide if we want to be better or bitter. On the other side of grief, we get to decide to find joy and contentment, and we get to decide what's next in this journey called life. Permission to grieve has been granted. Take all the time you need. Love yourself. Be kind to yourself. What will be waiting for you on the other side of your grief if you're experiencing it? It may be too soon for you to tell, but just know in time, there are many exciting, rewarding, and incredible experiences waiting just for you. Thank you.